everyone, welcome back to the comprehensive guide to Sylvanus in SMITE. Last time we talked about building Sylvanus in the current meta, and I'm going to be really directly honest with you. You can see in the bottom right there that this particular match only lasted approximately a dozen minutes. The reason for this is a really strong early game showing by our team. Alright, this is more to sort of point out some pros and cons of the early game here, as well as how devastating Sylvanus can be in the early game, even without building him specifically for the early game, even though he does perform better in the late game. We will talk about this and my decisions with Sylvanus in these dozen minutes. But I want to really quickly go over the team composition here, because this is a fairly significant factor, as both our team composition and theirs. You see, Marty is actually fairly good in the early game. He has that acid rain. I don't remember the name of the ability off the top of my head, but he's got the acid trail. He's got the spike that roots people, of course. He's got a lot going for him. He's got good ability damage in the early game, which helps him out in the early game. Solo, of course, is a mage. Has strong ability damage, obviously. Raijin, same thing. Arachne, as a jungler, is a bit more late game. She really comes online late game. And what I want to contrast to this really specifically is that, once again, we're talking about the importance of jungling. Alright, Bridget, because I don't know how to pronounce the first part of that. I think it's Man, but I could be wrong. So I'm going to stick with Bridget. But Bridget here is our jungler. She is a mage, officially, but she is being used here as a jungler, which, generally, as far as I've seen, this is not the only time I've seen this, seems to be very effective. But Bridget has a stronger early game than Arachne does, because, again, she's got that good baseline ability damage. Fafnir, of course, is fairly late game, given his ult and his, the scaling of his second ability. Not the magic power scaling, but how that scales with allied damage. And Ravan, of course, how early game Ravan is really depends on how he builds. We'll talk about that. But it's just worth noting that Surtur is a bit more mid to late game, really depending again on how he builds. And Ullr, of course, is very much an early game hunter as well. So we're going to go on ahead and get our eardrums apparently blasted out. Where are we at for volume here? Where did the volume go? There's the volume. We'll bring that down slightly. Bring it down to 15. Now you'll notice the very first thing I do is run to right lane. What I want to do, there's a specific path you can take that will give you plenty of time to throw a plant down at the solo and mid lane towers, and also still get into position for your duo lane, right? So where you throw this, kind of stick it close to the tower, put it a little bit farther in the back, just to keep it safe from potential enemy ranged attacks. Obviously, they have Ravan here, so that's not a concern, but just get in the habit of doing that in case the enemy solo laner is a mage or a hunter, for instance. Right, do the same thing here, and then we just run. And you can see where, even with Ullr at the green buff, there's still plenty of time for me to get to the yellow buff here. Well, not the yellow buff, the gold drop. Even if ideally, Ullr would have been at the gold, just in case, give you, slightly less distance travel, but you can see where that's really not, important. Alright, so it's really great for demonstration purposes as well. Now, you want to time this a little bit correct. I am very close to perfect timing. Not quite perfect. I'm slightly late, but I had pretty good timing there. Get that going a little early. Boom. Again, make sure when you throw that first ability that you're not leaving a plant behind, because if you miss twice, you're going to leave two plants, and the solo laner is going to lose their plant. Alright, which, if they're having a hard time mono-wise, is going to hurt them. Right, so you do want to be aware of that. Now, you'll also notice I don't mind letting the Ullr tank that a little bit. This is more specifically because I've got range and can kind of get away with that. And he, you can see, really didn't take that much damage here. Right, and I also want to point out that I make a pretty significant mistake at level 3. I don't get my pull at level 3. Alright, and I still am able to contribute. So don't let a mistake like that make you, I don't know, feel like the match is over or something like that. It's not, a crippling problem. But you'll see that in a little bit where I'm just getting poked. This is mostly about poke, which is where Sylvanus really shines in the early game. We're talking poke, right? I'm talking about dodging shots right here. Boom, get those minions down. Don't be afraid of killing minions with Sylvanus at this point. I don't have my Gauntlet of Thebes built, so I'm not going for the stacks at this particular point in time. It's more important that you clear and poke than it is for anything else, at least this early in the game. This is why I don't really have a huge problem with clearing waves, right? Great pickup by Surtur. That's pretty significant, actually, in all honesty. Really big move there. This actually becomes fairly relevant later on. This is where I make the mistake. You can see I accidentally put a point into my second ability. I misclicked that. And we get some, nice kills there. Bridget and Raijin pick up Scylla and Arachne, and you can start to see where we're really getting a snowball. So at this point, my priority has switched slightly. I just want to make sure Ullr doesn't die, because at this point, everyone else is ahead, right? So I'm not worried about that. I know that if I can just keep Ullr alive and make sure that Ullr doesn't fall behind, everything will work out, right? So that's what my current priority is. Ullr's going to go in. All right, we can play this game. Get some good damage on Fafnir. Make him, too nervous to try to attack, because if they're going to launch an attack, it's probably going to start with Fafnir initiating. So I want to keep an eye on that Fafnir. I want to try to keep him low. All right, you don't normally want to focus the support in the early game, but in this particular instance, considering my only real point is keeping Ullr alive, and also if you are going to focus a enemy support, it is going to be in the early game that is going to be best to do so, because they're not going to have the protections built up yet. So you can get away with a little bit more in the early game than you normally would be able to for the rest of the match. So again, my current priority here is just gotta keep Ullr alive. I'm looking to weaken down the minions here, give him some breathing room, make sure that he can clear this wave with less trouble. I'm using potions. I want to stay nice and healthy for him, right? I finally get my pull, and I make a really bold choice where we have minions, so I want to do some poke. So I grab Marty, right? And again, that was a move predicated on the idea that the minions would help out, and they do. I get the kill. At that point, it didn't really matter who got the kill. We get a nice kill in lane. Even me getting this kill is going to put Marty behind and Ullr ahead, so when I leave lane, that's going to be, I don't have to worry about the Ullr as much. Obviously, in a perfect world, Ullr would have gotten that, but if you actually go back and look, the reason why I did so... We'll go back a little bit more. Now, when I pull him in, like, the Ullr's right here, and you can see where he's used up the last of his mana, and Fafnir was body blocking, and the minion wave was about to come in, right? I couldn't guarantee that Ullr was going to be able to pick up that kill with the minions there, coming in fresh, with Fafnir there, and Ullr being out of mana. That wasn't a guarantee. Right? In fact, it was pretty unlikely with all those bodies between Ullr and Marty, so for me to pick up Marty just basically guaranteed that Marty would die, and ensured that Ullr was not going to overcommit to that in the middle of a fresh enemy wave, which I wasn't necessarily going to be able to save him from. Right? Now we get attacked by Arachne. Again, I ult there just specifically to get her off of Ullr. Ullr does not have that much mana. I'm just looking to body block. You'll see me continue to body block. I didn't want Fafnir stunning him. It turns out he had turned around. I didn't notice Fafnir had turned around at that point, but that's why I was specifically lining up like that. I see Bridget coming in here on Arachne. I call a gank. Arachne's out of mana, but she's also ulting. Here's Fafnir, who's also out of mana, which is why I don't mind going for this, right? The only reason I feel confident enough to go for this, I even pinged this for Pete's sakes, because I wanted to make sure that she was going after this. I didn't want to be abandoned and get killed by Marty. But the reason why I was so fine going after this, obviously it was a mistake on my part, was that he didn't have enough mana to contest that, but he did steal it, which was really great timing by the Fafnir, by the way. So shout out to the Fafnir on impeccable timing. Okay? That was absolutely a miscall on my part, though. And now I'm going to rotate to mid. I have Thebes. I'm level 5. It's a great time to rotate, right? I know that Ullr's going to be slightly ahead of Marty. You can see that they're the same level, so he's not hugely ahead. I would say probably a quarter to a half of a level ahead of Marty, which can be enough, right? Ullr has the benefit of basically 6 abilities, which helps. So I'm going to go join Raijin here. And I see that Surtur's getting ganked, and this is because Surtur is doing really well in solo lane. He's really dominating there. I call a gank over there. I'm on my way over there. Raijin thinks about it, goes back. He needs to clear a wave. I do not blame him for that. Arachne dies, and I realize they don't need me over here, so I'm going to turn back around to mid. Especially since you can see on the minimap right beforehand, and this is what I'm looking at here. I just want to point this out really quick. So I'm coming over here. The last time I saw Fafnir, he was heading this way, so I wanted to cut him off. He reappears here, so I turn around immediately, and I move back to mid, because I don't want Raijin fighting Fafnir and Scylla off alone. That's very risky, right? Not a good plan. So I come back to mid. Now I'm just looking for poke at this point, right? I miss a plant, which at this point doesn't hugely matter. Surtur's far enough ahead of Ravon at this point that even if he loses the plant, you can see it just barely over there, right underneath that tower. But even if he loses the plant, it's not going to make that big of a difference at this point because he's just that far ahead. You can see him invading their jungle, which is a bit of a risk, but very understandable in this particular situation. He's just trying to get some extra farm there. He's stealing the blue from Ravon, so he's not really going to need the plant even if I miss some more shots. So I don't need to worry about that anymore at this particular point, okay? So, you know, get some farm with Raijin and Bridget, and back we go into mid lane. Bridget's going over to the right, probably because she's probably expecting Surtur to get ganked. Turns out we have a surprise here in mid, where Ravon's going to come out of the left, I believe it's the left jungle if my memory serves on this match, that he just comes popping out of the left jungle and starts trying to slap Raijin. That's going to be pretty soon, because Ravon just abandons his lane outright. The ult to try to save Raijin, of course. Raijin does an excellent job turning that situation around, and now I'm trying to desperately body block Fafnir. And you'll see me use my pull just for the stun, alright? If only I could find my mouse, right? Really quick, I use my pull right here just to get it to stun. I don't actually need to pull him, obviously. He's already in melee range. I just wanted to get that stun to give Raijin a little bit of time, and I think that pull actually probably saved him because there was a couple of seconds where he wasn't getting hit, right? And here's Ravon coming in from, again, I'm pretty sure left jungle, and I barely escape thanks to the intervention of Bridget, which is absolutely fantastic. Surtur, for some reason, apologizes. Surtur doesn't need to apologize here, right? At this point, Ravon has deliberately chosen to leave his lane, which I mentioned is going to make him fall behind. I mentioned that to reassure the Surtur, but quite frankly, this is just a Ravon's response to Surtur's excellent gameplay here. Okay, Ravon has given up on being able to box Surtur and has decided he is going to try to start team fighting early, which is a really bad idea because we're 11 kills ahead. Okay? And I give Surtur some more reinforcement because Surtur has no need to apologize here. Surtur's been doing absolutely fantastic. And you can tell at this point that they're pretty close to surrendering. I think they surrender at 10 precisely, to be honest, or a couple of seconds afterwards. But at this point, I've got, obviously, Thebes. I'm getting those stacks. I'm going towards the breastplate of regrowth at this point because I want to be able to rotate. Because now that I know that Ravon has given up on his lane, I also now know that he's going to be in a lot of places that I, as a support, am not going to be happy to see him in. Right? He's going to force a lot of team fights that I might not want because he's free roaming, basically, having abandoned his lane. Right? He's back in his lane for farming, but he's not going to stay there. I already know this. He's going to leave that lane and go into the jungle to go and try to kill somebody else. Right, that's his plan. And there he goes back. He's going to go about halfway. He's going to enter the jungle around here, and he's going to try to probably go for Raijin because they're really trying for Raijin. We've got Arachne in the area. Fafnir initiated on him. Scylla just ulted poor Raijin, for Pete's sakes. They want mid lane. Alright, and they probably... I can actually tell you why they... It's not even a probably. They want mid lane because they want to be able to access the tower, the obelisk. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but they want that. So if they can get control of mid lane, they can get that, and that's going to be their really big hope at, saving this match. So I'm able to get Fafnir under tower, and Surtur, ults him, and I can see that the Fafnir isn't going to get away. Thank you, Brain. And I don't need to do anything else for that. You can actually see where I registered this. Wait, I just want you to see this. Where I pull him in, and I'm using abilities, and there's Surtur, and you can see me turn sharply to the right because Surtur has that. There's no way in hell that Fafnir is getting out of that situation, right? And then they're going to be surrendering in like 30 seconds. But we won that. I want to say we won that fight, but we really didn't. We technically lost that fight because Ravon killed Raijin and got way more out of that kill than we got out of Fafnir. We got Fafnir, the lowest level person on their team, which is normal for supports. That's not a fault of Fafnir. The Fafnir is actually pretty good. But the issue here is that Fafnir, being the lowest level, isn't going to offer as much golden experience as Raijin, who is 2 levels up on Scylla, even after the death. And the Ravon was 3 levels down originally. I mean, again, they surrendered right here, but at that particular point, there was no way. I mean, 12-1 at that point, 10 minutes in, we had a tower, we just won a whole bunch of fights. There was just absolutely no way. Surrender, I don't normally advocate for surrender, but I would have to say in that particular circumstance that there was really no other option there for them. There was no way in which they were going to win that. Their really big hope was to take control of the mid lane, and they did not succeed at doing that, so that was really not going to happen. Alright, now I'm going to talk, obviously, very briefly about builds here, because not a whole lot of builds have been going on. I already talked about my build. The Bridget, of course, is going absolutely with the fantastic... Now, the Doom Orb choice is a bit of a risk, okay? Very small level risk, and I want to talk about why it's a small level risk. Alright, Doom Orb is expensive. We can all agree on this. Doom Orb is one of the more expensive items a mage can build. Early on in the game, that expense can theoretically put you behind slightly here, okay? The primary reason she got away with Doom Orb is because she's got a stronger early game than Arachne. This is why. If she had been up against a ability-based assassin, or a more ability-based assassin at the very least, someone like perhaps Fenrir, or maybe a jungling Ravon, Doom Orb would have been riskier. Doom Orb was a pretty safe choice against her opponent, combined with the fact that for some reason Arachne built the healing rod here, which I'm not really sure why you would build this. Now, I understand, and I want to be very clear, this is a good item on Arachne. This is just not what you want to build as your second item on Arachne. Alright, for Arachne, you're going to want to either grab... A lot of the times people grab Golden Blade because it helps her clear camps, and it gives her a bit of a move speed boost. Both two things she really wants, okay? The healing rod is not really where you want to start. That's something you would probably want to throw in at the end of your build, because it can be, again, very effective on Arachne. It can be great, just not this early. Alright, so from Bridget's perspective, she saw Arachne and figured she could probably get away with the gamble of Doom Orb, and she was correct. But this was sort of doubled down upon by Arachne's choice to get this rod, okay? Which Bridget could not have known at the time that she was working towards Doom Orb, when she started Doom Orb. But I want you to be aware that Doom Orb worked here, but that's partially due to the circumstances, and partially due to the Bridget's skill, okay? So, Doom Orb is the correct choice here, but treat Doom Orb with some caution. Uller, of course, going for Transcendence. This is really normal for Uller. Not a lot of... Well, Transcendence is interesting for hunters right now, because any hunter that has good abilities or really good wave clear can get away with this a lot more effectively, because they can build those stacks more effectively. Uller, for example, has all these abilities, so he needs the mana. First off, he needs the max mana just by itself, but he also gets a lot of power out of this, which really helps his auto attacks. At the end of the day, he's still a hunter. Even if he's got really good abilities, he still wants a lot of power. So this is a huge win for Uller, and with all of his abilities and his ways at which he can attack a wave, building these stacks is pretty quick. It's the same thing for Marty with his Acid Rain trail. That makes it very easy for Marty to build these stacks safely with not much trouble here, right? So it's not really a big deal for Marty or for Uller. Other hunters who can very easily grab waves like this and be rewarded for it are Izanami, Neith, with her weave explosion combo. You drop a weave where the waves are going to be, you shoot a spirit arrow down the wave, and you not only hit them with the spirit arrow, but with the explosion from the weave as well. So Neith, again, very similarly, very easily builds stacks. Hunters like that can get away with Transcendence. Both of these can do that, and in this particular case, Sylvanus's AoE auto attacks beat out Fafnir's weak early game, because, again, as great as Sylvanus can be in the late game, and as great as Sylvanus often is in the late game, And as weak as his early game typically is perceived to be, those auto attacks are nothing to be sneezed at. Even running full protections, even not even, trying to get kills. I picked up the Marty because I wasn't confident Uller was going to, but I didn't start that fight intending to kill Marty. I started that fight intending Uller to kill Marty. I only picked that up because I wasn't confident that Uller could pull that off, given the minion's presence and Fafnir's really great job body blocking for Marty in that specific instance. Again, shout out to the Fafnir. He actually did the best he could with what he had. The Fafnir was great, alright? Back to the point, Raijin, of course, building for the Book of Thoth. Scylla obviously doing the same. Scylla was... you can see a lot of copied builds here, right? Uller was going for Hydra's Lament, obviously, over Soul Eater, which is what Marty was going for. Marty goes for Soul Eater because it stacks really well with his passive. But right now, people are really beginning to understand that while it's really important to have a good, strong early game, it's also important to not forget the late game, right? You can also see where neither Raijin nor Scylla finished their stacks. Now, again, for these mages, they stack pretty quick. Raijin has the combination of Raichu and his first ability, which the name of which I cannot remember off the top of my head. Scylla's got Crush, which makes her a little bit slower on building stacks, because Crush is her only really big, wave clear. For Scylla, more than Raijin, I'll say that probably she should have gone right for some early power, some quick power, something a little faster than Thoth, because even though she does really want high power, obviously, she's also a bit stronger in the late game because she's getting flat power increases as she's maxing her abilities. Raijin gets reduced cooldowns by a little bit, which again helps his wave clear, and he's got wider auto attacks. So for Raijin, Book of Thoth is going to be a little easier to stack. It's going to give him some late game advantage where he would normally be at a mild disadvantage against Scylla because of her passive, so she should have really kind of shored up her early game compared to Raijin, because Raijin's early game is unarguably better than Scylla's early game. Alright, Scylla just slaps in the late game, but has a bit of a rough time in the early game. I mean, compared to other mages at the very least. Raijin does not have this issue. So she really should have not gone for Thoth, and she should have gone for some faster power. My knee-jerk in this situation would have been Spear of Desolation, get some really strong power, get a little bit of cooldown, get a little bit of penetration there, right? Get a great passive. I would have gone for Spear of Desolation in this particular instance, or possibly, alternatively, Bancroft's Talon, but I've been building that less as a second item in the current meta. Anti-heal is just too strong to not build even without enemy teams healing, but in this situation, if I had been solo, I probably would have gone for Spear of Desolation, shore up my early game offense, get some cooldowns going there, and, worry about my late game when that comes, because, of course, my passive will help me out there. Fafnir, of course, as I've mentioned before, doing his best, doing what he could, not really sure what his third item was going to be there. This confuses me deeply. He absolutely... if I had to take a knee-jerk guess, he was going to build Chronos Pendant there, because a lot of Fafnir players like Chronos Pendant, because that passive helps them get their ult online a little faster, and Fafnir's ult, of course, is really, really devastating if used correctly. So that would be my knee-jerk, but personally, I think he would have been better off grabbing some form of MP5 first, because having your ult online fast doesn't matter if you don't have enough MP5. And while, yes, Chronos Pendant does provide 20 MP5, grabbing... very possibly you could have been looking to grab the earrings right afterwards, but you could also grab 20% cooldowns for Pridwen. No, you wouldn't have the passive of Chronos Pendant, obviously, but that passive doesn't make as big of a difference as some people think it does. One day I'll talk about my problems with Chronos Pendant and its sort of overhyped status in the SMITE community. I'll have a dedicated video on that. Maybe I'll do that tomorrow, but anyways, that's not important right now. Either way, I think he was going to build Chronos Pendant here, which wasn't going to be a terrible choice, but again, I think Pridwen or possibly Breastplate of Valor could have been a better choice there. But with that being said, I want to really quickly go back to Ravon because I didn't talk about him. And he had the most difficulties, right? The Surtur was absolutely dominating. Great ganks by Bridget as well. Great counter ganks by Bridget as well, I would like to mention. But the Ravon was, in fact, building decently. His build isn't bad. He's got the ability idea in mind, so he was building for the early game, which was going to help, okay? It just so happened that the starter either was a better player here, which is entirely possible, or Bridget had a really great early gank. I'm not really sure. I wasn't obviously over there, so I couldn't tell you specifically. We do have I believe it's the Cannoneer's Breastplate, which helps with minions, which increases minion damage. I don't know if this affects the imps. I think it does, but I haven't gotten any kind of concrete numbers on that. Either way, it does increase his own regular minions, which is going to give him a really great advantage in these, fights with Ravon, and combined with Surtur's third ability, him throwing the rock to stun, and the damage over time from his first ability, plus potential extra damage from minions with this breastplate here. Absolutely gross amount of damage. Really interesting strategy. It only really would have worked against... It only really works, this particular minion-based strategy only works against laning opponents that do not have great wave clear, which Ravon has okay wave clear. His 10-hand Shadow Fist hits the whole wave if you're right there, but his Prana Assault only really usually hits 3, although it's on a short cooldown. So this was a very mildly risky choice, because if the Ravon played this specifically in the way of deliberately poking Surtur to pull minion aggro and then using Prana Assault on all 6 minions and then 10-hand Shadow Fisting afterwards, that would have been a really big problem for Surtur. I don't know if Ravon did this based on how that lane went. I would have to say probably not. But if Ravon had played that a bit more aggressively and been a bit more proactive on minion kills, I think probably this could have turned out against Surtur slightly. But again, Bridget was going to be ahead of Arachne due to an interesting combination of choices that really worked out in Bridget's favor, and that all would have worked out quite well. I will say, though, that it's generally going to be more worthwhile for a solo laner to build their protections first, so I think Ravon would have had more success if he'd reversed his Soul Leader and Glad Shield. Get the defense first, then build your damage. Alright, at least for this meta. Okay, if you're going to build hybrid, there's nothing wrong with that, but get your defense first. Ravon already had Bluestone for damage, should have gone for defense next, okay? But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. If you liked this, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, please ignore me. And if you have any comments, questions, concerns, ideas, suggestions, or requests, please leave them down in the comment section below. And thank you all very much for joining me, and have a great 24 hours.